I always thought that the real hell was queuing at the bank on payday, or family groups on WhatsApp at 7 in the morning with prayer chains and good morning stickers. But no, the real hell, I discovered, is having a neighbor who behaves as if she were a judge, a health inspector, and an FBI agent, all at the same time, with a dash of disorder disguised as community zeal. I've lived in this condominium for 3 years. It's quiet, a bit run down, but with its qualities. The communal garbage can, for example, has always been a sensitive issue, of course, but never a battleground. Until she moved in. That woman who looks like she's straight out of a tutorial on how to meddle in other people's lives with class and ruthlessness. You know the type? The one who doesn't look you in the eye, but stares at your garbage bag as if she were analyzing evidence of a crime. That's the one. It all started with looks. She'd walk past the garbage can, frown, and let out that that's half disgust, half accusation. I ignored it because, honestly, I have a life. I have a bill. I have a cat that vomits on my pillows. I'm a late sleeper. I don't have time for toilet drama. But for her, every black bag left there was a manifesto. And apparently, my bag was the most revolting. One Sunday afternoon, always Sunday, as if the tranquility of others was an affront, she approached me in the corridor. Not to say good morning, not to comment on the weather, but to make an informal complaint in a tone that seemed diplomatic, but carried the poison of the passive aggressiveness of someone who was born to be an antagonist of peace. Have you noticed the smell coming from the garbage can? It looks like there's something dead in there. And then he looked at me, long, as if he expected me to spontaneously confess, yes, it was me. I buried a body. Surrender me. But I just smiled, sincere and uncomfortable. Because what do you say to this kind of accusation? My banana was stale? The chicken won, but it didn't deserve a public trial? I left, thinking it was just another one of her weekend freakouts. Then, on Tuesday, there was a notice from the landlord stuck in the elevator. Attention to waste. Garbage can has a strong odor. Please respect the time and type of disposal. So far, so good. Until I read the part scribbled by hand in red, as if it were an apocalyptic biblical addendum. Smell of dead animals in the last days. This is not normal. And guess what? Yes, a drawn arrow, pointing to my floor. I laughed, nervously, because the smell really was unbearable. But I was absolutely sure. My garbage was ordinary, domestic, even dull. Nothing there could justify the stench of the zombie apocalypse. And that's when I decided to open the container. Innocent, curious, idiotic. I lifted the lid and was hit by a hot, sour breath that seemed to have come straight from a demon's intestines. In the corner, wrapped in a half-open plastic bag, there they were, 2 possum bodies. Yes, possums. Their tails had fallen off, their teeth were showing, and they looked as if they had died in anger at the world. The scene looked like something out of a rural crime documentary. And again, the feeling that someone was laughing at me. I returned to the apartment with the images stuck to my retina. My mind was racing. I began to reconstruct every detail of the last few days, my every step to the garbage can, every strange movement in the corridor. And it all led to a conclusion so absurd that I felt like a madman for considering it real. What if she, the same woman who accused me, had put it there on purpose? To incriminate me? Because that's what starts to happen when you live close to someone who turns everything into a trial. You start to doubt yourself. You start to imagine conspiracies on top of conspiracies. And worse, you start to notice signs where before there was only routine. The way she looked at the garbage bag, the way she talked aloud about the smell with other residents, how she passed her cell phone near the dumpster as if she were recording evidence. That wasn't zeal. That was premeditation. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept mentally going over everything, because what had once seemed like a pet peeve now had a body, a tail, and teeth. And it was there, putrefied, at the foot of my name, in the middle of the garbage. The next day, the The garbage can was emptied earlier than usual, as if the administration were trying to cover up a crime scene. But the smell still hung in the air like a curse, a sour reminder that something rotten, literally and metaphorically, was happening there. And as much as I just wanted to get back to the routine, I knew I couldn't ignore it. Because if there's one thing I've learned from living with people like this, it's that when they decide you're the villain, the narrative has already been written even before the first accusation. And she was behaving like someone who had just won a citizenship award. She walked around the building as if she were an honorary trustee, holding a bottle of hand sanitizer in her right hand and a folder full of notes in her left. She said good morning with that aggressive intonation, like someone who wants to make it clear that she knows something you don't know. And every time she passed me, she'd make some off-the-cuff remark about the state of things, or how some of the residents have no sense of hygiene. Her plan was clear: to turn me into the pig of the building, the agent of rotation, the culprit of the condominium's biological threat. And her audacity was such that she no longer made a point of disguising it. The other day, going down in the elevator, I bumped into one of the neighbors on the 6th floor, the one who never talks to anyone, and he simply said, bluntly, "I think you're exaggerating with this garbage thing, right?" I just shook my head, but inside, my blood was boiling, because if even the mute in the building was talking about it, then the woman was spreading gossip like it was cheap perfume. That's when I decided to investigate, not out of paranoia, but out of necessity, because there comes a time when you realize either you expose the plot or you end up sunk in it. I started with the cameras, the few that worked, of course, one on the 1st floor, another near the entrance to the parking lot. I asked for access with the excuse of personal security. The doorman gave me a USB stick with the last 48 hours. I spent the evening watching pixelated recordings as if I were deciphering the code from the Matrix, and there she was, in gym clothes, a cap, a mask, and a black bag, at 4:38 in the morning, exactly in the interval between the collection and the new batch of garbage. She opens the lid, looks around, and dumps the contents in. He walks away as if he had just thrown away a banana peel, not 2 fetid corpses. That wasn't suspicion, it was proof. The next day, I went back to the concierge with the images. The doorman looked at me with the look of someone who doesn't want to get involved, but can't pretend he didn't see it either. He said he would report it. I knew nothing would come of it, but now I had the material. And with that, the chance to protect myself. But then came the complete absurdity. 2 days later, I received a written warning from the administration, a formal notice alleging improper conduct related to waste disposal and possible biological contamination, with a deadline for a response and everything. When I read it, my hands were shaking with anger. What had been a veiled accusation had become an official document, and she got exactly what she wanted, to turn suspicion into an internal process. I went to the manager. I showed him the images. He watched with the look of someone who has just realized he's in the middle of a firefight with a spoon in his hand. He said he was going to analyze it, that he didn't want to take sides, that the neighborhood was sensitive. Translation, she wasn't going to do anything, because she was the kind of person who knew how to play the game. She knew how to involve people, plant ideas, distort facts. She knew how to manipulate the language of concern into a social weapon. And things escalated again. A new note appeared on the wall. If the smell comes back, we'll have to call health surveillance. No signature, of course, but the handwriting, unmistakable. The neat handwriting of someone who writes as if they were praying. And to complete the circus, rats started appearing in the parking lot. Coincidence? Maybe. But within the logic of a mind that manipulates small disasters to fuel its crusade, nothing seemed random. The narrative was being constructed. First, the garbage. Then, the skunks. Now, the rats. And me, I was the common link, the outcast. By then, I was emotionally drained, because it wasn't just the situation itself. It was the weariness of being the target of an insanity that no one else seemed to want to face. It was the weariness of trying to prove that you weren't guilty of something so ridiculous that it shouldn't even need defending. It was the isolation that comes when everyone would rather ignore than get involved. And, worst of all, it was the feeling of powerlessness, because she knew where to hit me. She knew that a problem like this, no matter how absurd, sticks to you like an oil slick. Even if you wipe it off, the smell remains. And in the world of gossip, smell is enough to convict. But I still had a trump card, and I was ready to use it. I'm not one for anger, but at that point, I wasn't holding on to anything anymore. No anger, no patience, no sanity. I just wanted back the basic right to throw my garbage away without being accused of trafficking in carrion. And when you've been pushed to that point, what's left is the counterattack, but not just any counterattack. I wanted something clean, cold, without shouting. I wanted the kind of revenge that doesn't shout, but whispers in your ear, "You've lost." So I started recording. I installed 2 simple cameras, one in the corridor, camouflaged between some plastic plants that I never had the patience to water, and the other pointed discreetly at the garbage can area. All legalized, all under the pretext of home security. After all, who would question someone trying to protect their home, right? The first few days, nothing much. She passed by several times, always with that gait of someone who measures the world with a moral ruler. She'd stop at the rubbish dump, sniff the air as if she were a sommelier of other people's rot, and carry on. Sometimes I wrote it down in a little notebook. Yes, a little notebook. That wasn't an implication. It was planning. But then, on a Wednesday that began like any other, the camera captured the exact moment when she reappeared with a new black bag. This time, her body was more curved, as if she was trying to hide the contents. She came close to the garbage can, looked around, and, in an almost theatrical way, put the bag inside, as if making a symbolic gesture, an offering. I don't know. He stood there for a few seconds. Then she took her cell phone out of her pocket and took a picture of the dumpster. Yes, she planted the evidence and then documented it as if she had discovered the crime of the century. It made me laugh and feel nauseous, because the level of distortion was so great that it bordered on the artistic. It was like watching a play staged just for me, the unwitting spectator of my own nightmare. I took the video, I edited it, I cut out the exact moment, adjusted the contrast, even added a discreet caption. Nothing appealing, just the facts. And I sent it to the condominium group with an objective message. For those who still believe that the garbage can stink because of me, here's a video of the real source of the problem. Silence. For hours. Nothing. No emoji. No reply. Until the first comment appeared. Is this serious? And then came the domino effect. One by one, residents began to react. Some with indignation, others with jokes, because there are always the funny ones. But the important thing was that now, the narrative was no longer hers alone. The landlord called me in private. He tried to tone it down. He said it was regrettable, that he couldn't imagine it had come to this, that she might need help. I listened politely, but I didn't swallow a word of it, because what annoyed me wasn't just what she did. It was the fact that everyone knew, felt, understood, but only took action when it became a spectacle. Nobody wanted to get dirty before, but now that the dirt had a high-definition image, everyone was defending the truth. The next day, it was gone. Nobody saw, nobody heard. The apartment door was closed, the curtains drawn, and, for the first time in weeks, the corridor without the smell of dead things or social judgment. The peace, although temporary, was almost disconcerting. Like when a toothache suddenly disappears and you stand there, suspicious, waiting for the next throb. But of course, it didn't end there. Because it's not just those who do it who are really sick. It's those who do it and think it's right. And that kind of person doesn't disappear. They retreat. They hide. It reorganizes itself. And it comes back stronger. like a mutant virus. On Friday, 2 days after the video was released, I received an anonymous letter under my door. Handwritten, yellow paper, the smell of cheap perfume. Just 4 words. I know what you did. I confess, I laughed, because it's not every day that you find yourself in a fifth-rate thriller script. But at the same time, that letter, that ridiculous sentence, chilled me, because it didn't matter if I was right. It didn't matter about the video, the truth, the cameras. When you're dealing with someone who lives in a parallel universe, logic no longer applies. You can show all the evidence, and still, to her, you're the wrong one, the liar, the manipulator. After the letter, I spent a few days sleeping with one eye open and the other half awake. The kind of silent vigil that paranoia imposes. The kind that makes you double-check that you've locked the door and avoid even turning on the hallway light so as not to provoke a new reaction from her. And it's funny how quickly our minds adapt to other people's madness. Before long, I was doing visual scans before leaving the house, checking the garbage before approaching, and I even started talking to my cat as if he were my security team. Insanity level? Total. But in that reality, it seemed sensible. The building's administration, for its part, did what every bureaucratic system does. Nothing. They forwarded the incident, suggested a conversation, asked for common sense from the parties involved. Common sense. The most useless word in the vocabulary when it comes to someone who thinks it's normal to throw dead possums in the trash to incriminate their neighbor. And even with the video evidence, even with everyone knowing the truth, the most that came out of it was a public apology from the landlord on behalf of the building and a generic warning about respectful coexistence. She never showed up. She disappeared for a whole week. No one saw her enter. No one saw her leave. The apartment was closed, silent, without the footsteps that used to echo on the floor, without the suspicious sense of disinfectant mixed with eucalyptus essence, until one Monday morning, when I was beginning to believe that perhaps she had left, I heard that sound again. The hall handle turning, the creak of the door opening slowly, the footsteps, and there she was, as if nothing had happened, with the same cap, the same bottle of alcohol in her hand, and that fixed look of someone who sees everything with moral superiority, even after being caught on video committing insanity. She passed me in the corridor. She didn't say anything, but she stopped next to the garbage can, looked inside, frowned, and wrote something down in her notebook, which now had a new sticker, a yellow smiley on the cover, as if that sabotage diary were the bullet journal of a psychopathic teenager. It gave me a mixture of laughter and despair, because the script was repeating itself. Not exactly the same, of course. She wasn't going to use the same trick, but the essence was the same. The woman wouldn't give up. She couldn't accept that she had lost. She couldn't tolerate the fact that for a brief moment she had been exposed. Because people like that don't see themselves as villains. She probably sees herself as a vigilante, as a martyr, as someone who tried to alert the building and was unjustly silenced by a plot, by neighbors conniving with the rot. And that's when I realized that there was going to be no happy ending. There would be no redemption, no epic closure. All I had to do was adapt. I learned to live with it, to treat insanity as part of the scenery, like a crooked post in the street. You know it's wrong, that it bothers you, that one day it might fall over, but until then, you dodge it and keep going. But the story hasn't stopped completely. Of course it didn't. 2 weeks later, I received a notice from the town hall. Someone had reported my apartment for a persistent bad smell coming from inside the unit. I almost laughed, because the accusation was as pathetic as it was predictable. I took the images from the cameras, the reports from the administration, the videos already sent, and went to the sub-prefecture to sort it out in person. The inspector, a middle-aged man who looked like he'd seen it all, looked at the papers, watched the video, and let out such a sincere, "What a disgrace," that I almost felt welcomed. He filed it away on the spot. He told me to be careful with these people, And I just shook my head. Because how do you protect yourself from someone who sees evil even in your garbage bag? Time passed. The building returned to its routine. She walked the corridors less. The notes stopped. The overt surveillance gave way to a more passive, but still noticeable presence. Every now and then, I see the light on at dawn. It's still there, and I'm still here. Two beings sharing the same space, separated by a concrete wall and an invisible trench made of unresolved resentment. And if I've learned anything from all this, it's that the real terror isn't in spirit movies or bloody nightmares. It's in living next to someone who decides to turn you into a villain and uses garbage as a weapon. It's in knowing that, no matter how hard you try to prove your innocence, there will always be those who choose to believe the most absurd version of the story. Because nothing grabs the attention more than a good piece of gossip filled with literal rot. The smell has passed, the skunks have gone, but the rancid smell remains. And every time I pass the dump, I still feel that slight discomfort in the air. Not because it stinks, but because I know that there are people who stink inside. And that, my friend, there's no selective waste collection that can solve. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave your like and comment below. Tot Tintin!